I would like to begin to welcome people here, but before I start doing the introductions, I would like to ask Jeff Hillam if you would, at least on a part of GLELA.
Good evening, everybody. We are just grateful that you're here to speak with us, and we're grateful for all of you who have tuned in tonight to listen. And listen, I think we're going to have a great time, and I'll turn it right back over. Thank you so much.
It now gives me really great pleasure to introduce Dr. Fania Davis. She is a longtime social justice activist. She is also among the millions who have experienced the shock, the grief, and the fury of losing someone to racial violence. In 1963, at age 15, two close friends of Fania's were killed in the Birmingham Sunday school bombing, which was carried out by white supremacists trying to terrorize the rising civil rights movement. 6 years later, police broke into her home, and her husband was shot and nearly killed, all because of their activism and support of the Black Panthers. These events helped form within Fania a passionate commitment to social transformation. In 1979, Ms. Davis received her law degree from the University of California, Berkeley. She would practice for some 27 years as a civil rights trial lawyer. In her early 20s, she devoted herself to organizing an international movement to defend her sister, Angela Davis, from politically motivated capital murder charges aimed at silencing her calls for racial and social justice. Feeling out of balance and intuitively knowing that she needed more healing energies in her life, in the mid-1990s, she began a PhD program in Indigenous Studies at the California Institute of Integral Studies, a program that she completed in 2003. Since then, Fania has been engaged in a search for healing alternatives to adversarial justice. She is now a leading national voice on race and restorative justice, which invites a fundamental shift in the way we think about and do justice. She has taught restorative justice at San Francisco's New College Law School and Indigenous peacemaking at Eastern Mennonite University Center for Justice and Peacemaking. She writes and speaks on these subjects. Her recently published book in 2019 is The Little Book of Race and Restorative Justice, Black Lives, Healing, and U.S. Social Transformation. The search for a healing justice also led Fania to bring restorative justice to Oakland. A founder and currently retired director of Restorative Justice of Oakland Youth, R-Joy, isn't that a wonderful acronym? Fania served as counsel, that's C-O-N-S-E-L, to the International Council, C-O-U-N-C-I-L, of 13 Indigenous grandmothers. The Los Angeles Times recently named her a new civil rights leader of the 21st century. Fania's research interests include race and restorative justice, social justice, exploring the indigenous roots, particularly the African indigenous roots, of restorative justice. Fania is a mother of 2 children, a dancer, and a practitioner of yoga. She has received many awards, one of which is the Ubuntu Award for Service to Humanity, the Tikkun, which is Repair the World Award, and the Ebony Power 100 Award. It gives me very great pleasure to welcome Dr. Fania Davis to GLELA, which stands for, those of you who might not know, that if you're from the community, the university community might not know, that GLELA stands for the Greater Lowell Interfaith Leadership Alliance. I am currently past president of that, serving as past president of that. Jeff is our current president, and he gave you a little bit of a welcome earlier. So our format tonight is going to be kind of conversational, but I'm going to let Dr. Davis tell you a little bit more about how she sees this happening. And you were also going to tell us about the song we were listening to, I think, too, right? So anyway, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Imogen. And thank you, Jeff Hillam, for welcoming me to your space here this evening. For you, it's still afternoon, and for me, rather, it's still afternoon in California. Yes, I'll tell you about the singer in just a moment. I want to also thank the Greeley Scholar Committee for the tremendous honor of selecting me as a 2021 Greeley Peace Scholar. It's quite an honor to be in the company of such international icons as as Albie Sachs, who is a constitutional jurist. It's like being a Supreme Court justice for this country of South Africa. And of course, he also stood side by side with the great Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela in the anti-apartheid activist movement. So, you know, wow, to join him is just really incredible. And then there's Lema Gbowie, also another international icon, peace activist, women's activist. So I'm truly honored. Thank you so much, Greeley Peace Scholar Committee, for inviting me to spend 2 weeks at UMass Lowell. And I also want to do a land acknowledgement for the land where I live, work, and play, and that's the unceded territory of the Chochenyo Ohlone people here in Oakland in the San Francisco Bay Area. Whenever I speak, wherever I speak, with whomever I speak, I start as a matter of principle with land acknowledgements. And why do I feel so strongly about this? And why is it that these land acknowledgements are becoming so widespread now in the last year or so throughout the country? Why do they matter? First, in indigenous cultures, the land is sacred. The land doesn't belong to us as like a thing belongs to us. We belong to the land. The land is our mother. She nurtures us. She enfolds us and holds us. She nourishes us, and she sustains us. So that is why that elevated conception and relationship with the land in indigenous cultures is why they begin most public gatherings with an honoring of the land. And there are other reasons why we do these land acknowledgements today. In this historical moment, when we invoke the land, we're also acknowledging that this land but the original inhabitants of this land were massacred and were destroyed. The land was taken. So that this is a land that is post-genocidal, not that different from West Bank, not that different from, actually, I should have said, not that different from Rwanda, and not that different from Germany. This is a post-genocidal land. And so when we do the land acknowledgements today, we are acknowledging that this is a post or is an occupied land, and it's a genocidal land. So when we invoke the land, we're saying that this is an occupied land, every acre of it, no less than West Bank is, and no less than Ukraine is. It's a genocidal land, no less than Germany, again, or Rwanda. And I say it every time. I say this wherever I speak and whenever I speak, because we have buried these truths for so long. We have chosen to see ourselves as someone else other than who we truly are. And we have silenced this truth. We have buried this truth. The good thing is that this is starting to change today. Also, land acknowledgements are the first step on the reckoning journey to recognize the harm, to recognize the wrong that was done. And we must not only recognize history's pain, we must take action to repair it. We must take action to ensure non-recurrence. So let me sort of recite this formula. I don't like formula, but these standards, these 4 standards for restorative justice accountability. And you'll hear me repeat it kind of like a mantra for me. Those 4 standards are: 1, recognize the pain; 2, take responsibility for it; 3, take action to repair it; and prevent recurrence, the 4 R's of Restorative Justice Collective Accountability. Maybe I'll stop there and just say that the beautiful music that you heard and the video that you saw when you were coming in is created by the artist June Lila Johnson, and she is of Diné, Cheyenne, and European origin. And I just love that music, and I play it a lot when I speak while people are entering. All nations rise. She says that today, it's not going to be cowboys versus Indians. It's going to be all the beautiful races who are standing up against genocide, all the beautiful races that are standing up against land theft and against slavery and the slave trade and all of their afterlives. I thought was so beautiful. And that the weapons would not be bows and arrows, it will be speaking the truth and taking responsibility and having faith. So that's the story on June Lila Johnson. So Reverend Imogene, we're going to have a conversation here. It's nice to not have to just go on and on for 30 minutes, 40 minutes with me doing all the talking. Because in restorative justice, there's a sort of radically democratic approach. In peacemaking circles, we want everyone to be heard. We want everyone's voice to be spoken. Yeah, so I miss that sometimes when I'm the only one speaking. So thank you for making this a conversation. And I hope you all jump in too, right?
So I would like you, if you don't mind, starting a little bit more about the Our Joy part, the Restorative Justice of Oakland Youth. What motivated you a little bit more for that, and how do those restorative justice circles work, or how did that work? Can you say a little bit more about that?
Okay, sure.
Or maybe you don't want to start there. You can start somewhere else if you don't want to that one. But
no, you're, like I told you in an email, you are the pilot of this ship that we're all sailing in right now. So I'll follow the direction that you set out for us. So yeah, Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth, Our Joy, began in 2005. And I was moved and called to do this for a number of, based on a number of factors. I've spoken a lot about my background and being born in Birmingham, Alabama, and living atop Dynamite Hill. That was literally the name of my neighborhood. And that referred to the frequency of bombings of the homes in our neighborhood, because we were rising Black families that were pushing the color line. And even though we were awakened very often in the morning to the sounds of dynamite blasts going off all around us, we were fortunate that our home was never hit. But other homes were ministers who were very active side by side with Dr. King. Their homes were bombed. Churches were bombed, the ones that stood up and spoke out against racial terror and against racial apartheid, essentially, which is what existed, of course, when I was coming up in the 50s and early 60s there. And as you mentioned, 2 of my close friends, one lived just a few doors down from me, were killed in one of those bombings, the one that's probably known more widely than any of the other bombings there. And that was a Birmingham Sunday school bombing of 1963. Yeah. And so, yeah, that happened. And growing up in an environment where all the social messaging, the pervasive social messaging says you're subhuman, you don't deserve a movie theater, you don't deserve an amusement park, you don't deserve a swimming pool. Growing up with that, and for me, some of the earliest words that I learned to read were colored and white, and that's because those signs were ever present wherever I went. in the city of Birmingham, Alabama. And I was blessed to have a mother who was so powerful, and she modeled for us resistance, and she would always tell us, don't you ever let anybody tell you that you are less than they are. And she would model it, because when we would go downtown with her, and say a kid, maybe a 17-year-old who's working in the summer as a clerk in a big department store, when giving her change back, would say, hey, here's Sally, here you go, here your change is. And my mother would say, young man, if you can't see fit to call me by my name, Mrs. Davis, I'm happy to take my business elsewhere. Always very dignified, but always speaking truth to power, and modeling that for us. She was very active herself in many movements, the Scottsboro Brothers case, the movements during the Depression, the anti-eviction actions, and of course also in the civil rights movement. But nonetheless, I left the South with this, especially after losing my girlfriends, with this yearning, this irreversible, irretrievable commitment to be a warrior for social transformation, to do all that I could do and be all that I could be, to change the racial terror that was all around me and the racial inequalities. And then not long after I left the South, you heard Reverend Imogene say that my husband and I, who were active, in solidarity with the Black Panthers, we had our home invaded by police and almost killed him. The bullet entered into his shoulder here and exited just millimeters away from his spine. And again, I feel very blessed that he wasn't permanently injured. He survived that. I survived it. We were charged with attempted murder of police officers, but a very brave judge named the truth, and that is that the police entered our homes not because they had any valid reason to do so, but because of our political activity, and it was political persecution, the judge decided, in violation of our constitutional rights. So the charges were dropped. But then just months after that, my sister was targeted for a legal lynching by then President Ronald Reagan and, then President Nixon, and then Governor Ronald Reagan. It was a tough time for our family, because all of the charges against her were capital charges. And if she had been found guilty, she would have been executed. And I and my family and other friends just dropped everything and traveled the world and organized movements and marches and demonstrations to create this movement, a movement that was powerful enough to save her life. And we were able to save her life. Actually, it was an all-white jury that acquitted her of all charges. And that was in '72. So after her case, the lawyers in her case persuaded me to become a civil rights trial lawyer. I went to law school. I basically spent almost 30 years, about 27 years, practicing law as a civil rights trial lawyer, fighting racism in the courts, and also continuing my activism, fighting injustice and especially racism in the streets. And after 27 years of doing this, and after all of those events that occurred when I was in Birmingham and a little bit later, I was filled with rage. I was just consumed by it, and actually became ill. And I somehow knew through dreams and synchronicities that I was being invited to bring more healing energies, more spiritual energies, and more creative energies into my life to come back into balance. And synchronistically, I found out about this PhD program, which allowed me to study in Africa and all over the world with incredible indigenous healers. Got the PhD and couldn't find a job doing this healing work that would pay me. So I ended up kicking and screaming, going back into the practice of law. But it's a good thing that I went back into the practice of law, because some lawyers invited me to a conference where I learned about restorative justice for the first time. And if I hadn't gone back to the practice of law, I mean, I would have learned about it, but perhaps not at that time. And I was just so taken by this new kind of justice, Reverend Imogene, that was dawning on the stage of human history. A justice that heals instead of a justice that harms, a justice that seeks to repair damaged relationships instead of a justice that damages them farther, and a justice akin to Dr. King's vision of justice as love, correcting that which revolts against love, and akin to Mahatma Gandhi's vision of justice. That act alone is just, which does no harm to either party to a dispute. So I was just really so deeply moved to learn of this new but old justice. And I say new but old because it's based on, restorative justice is based on indigenous ways of thinking about and doing justice. I'm talking on and on and on. Do you have any? I'm going to stop right now and ask if you want to comment. I will get to Our Joy, but that's a little bit farther down my life's journey. It's hard to tell the story of Our Joy without going back to Birmingham. Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions to ask or responses to that? You don't have to. It doesn't have to necessarily be a question. It could be a comment,
Right.
reaction.
Right. Yeah, just what are you feeling, and what's moving in you now? Sharing that.
Paul?
Yeah.
How far back do you have stories of restorative justice models, maybe even in prehistory in tribal relations or pre-literate societies? Or I'm not even sure how to phrase the question. But
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that that restorative justice values and processes are as old as humanity, and many, or not as old as indigenous cultures are. As old as ancient cultures are. And I want to just clarify that restorative justice is a contemporary expression and an expression of ancient values, indigenous values, and many spiritual, religious values, one of which is respect and the equal moral worth and dignity of every human being. You are not the worst thing that you have ever done. And you are not the worst thing that has ever been done to you. I see you. That's a Zulu greeting. I see you, like beyond the physical, beyond the external. I see your spirit. I see the gift that you are to the world. And this Zulu greeting is Sawubona, and we use this a lot with our children in restorative justice for Oakland youth, who were at risk for gang involvement or in gangs. Children who probably had already gone to more funerals at the age of 16 than I at the age of 72 have gone to through my entire lifetime. Children who were stereotyped if they had hoodies on or if they were sagging, and the teachers automatically, many of them assuming that they were, gangsters and all of that. And so Sawubona was sort of an antidote to that. I see your goodness. And we kept seeing our children until they began to see themselves, and incredible transformations occurred. Yeah. And many cultures and religions have a similar notion that we are inherently good as human beings. Now, in Western culture, there is also this belief that humans are inherently not so good, and humans need governments and social contracts and institutions and structures to keep them in line, because if without those structures, we will descend into the jungle, the Hobbesian sort of idea of the Hobbesian jungle. So, that's one value. Another value that is at the foundation of restorative justice is relationality. We are all one, as Dr. King said. We are all bound in a, how did he put it, in a web of inescapable mutuality. I'm sorry, somebody said something?
A garment of mutuality.
That's right. Yes.
Right? That's
the garment. That's right. Right. Yeah. And we see the same idea in indigenous traditions like Watasu, Mitakoye, or Yasin. We are all relatives, and we are here on earth to take care of one another, to heal one another, and to nurture one another, and not just human beings to human beings, but to all of this applies to all of the Earth's inhabitants. We are here to take care of ourselves, take care of the two-leggeds and the four-leggeds and the plant people and the ones that swim. And we have this family relationship with all of life. And life is sacred, and that relationship, that interrelationship is sacred. And of course, now modern science and quantum physics is understanding that, as Dr. King said, he talked about the interrelated structure of reality. So interrelationality is the nature of reality, quantum physics is starting to tell us. So that idea, and I see it, I think is the whole idea of right relationship, is that Hebrew? I know we have some scholars and spiritual scholars and religious scholars in here, but it's this notion of this fundamental value in restorative justice, that we are interrelated. I am because we are, and we are, and we are because I am. Ubuntu. And I think there's a notion of right relationship, right? So justice as right relationship, and restorative justice as learning to be in right relationship with one another. So these are, I'm kind of going into this because I want you to, if you don't already know all this stuff, see that there's a very strong spiritual foundation, especially in terms of values and core beliefs. And the third fundamental value of restorative justice is responsibility. Precisely because of our intimate and close and deep interconnection, we have the responsibility to repair relationships if we end up hurting someone, to repair that garment of our interrelatedness. So a lot of people think restorative justice is just a slap on the wrist, and we're coddling the criminals and making it easy for the wrongdoers. But most people who have done restorative justice in the context of, say, school disciplinary hearings, or in the context of the justice system, understand it's tough, because it's about looking in the mirror at yourself and really contemplating, reflecting on all of the impacts of the way that you've harmed someone. And it's about sitting in circles very often, or in other encounter processes, and listening to the person, facing the person that you have harmed, and listen to them talk about the human consequences of what you have done. And the way that these processes are facilitated, of course, that encounter, first of all, we don't come together, we don't bring them together without some very robust risk assessment. We work with the parties separately first. And one of the main things we do before bringing together a person who has caused harm with a person who has been harmed is make sure that the person who has caused harm takes responsibility, that third value of restorative justice. If they are minimizing the harm, if they are trivializing the harm, and even in some cases, if they are blaming the person that they harmed, no, we are not going to have an encounter only for you to hurt that person again. Restorative justice is a healing justice, and it flips the paradigm. Our justice, our prevailing justice, is a harming justice. You could say that in many respects, our current justice system is about accusing, judging, and punishing. Accusing is you're charged with a violation of a law. Judging, you're adjudicated, and punished, you are sentenced for it. And that's the end of the story. That's the nature of our justice. If I harm somebody, that creates an imbalance in the scales of justice. And the only way that rebalancing can occur is if I am harmed, right? So we respond to the original harm with another harm, and that's supposed to be justice. And that replicates, reproduces, even metastasizes harm very often. It increases the collective energies of harm in the world. So restorative justice says no. It's not just about blaming, judging, and punishing. It's about, and that's a backward-looking justice as well. Restorative justice asks what harm occurred and what are the needs and responsibilities of everyone involved, and how does everyone, the community of persons impacted, come together to address those needs and responsibilities and heal the harm. So restorative justice responds to harm, conflict, not with another harm, but restorative justice sees this conflict and this harm as an opportunity to sort of lean into it and learn and grow and transform oneself. So that's the biggest difference. And restorative justice in that sense is a forward-looking justice. It wants to help repair those relationships so that people in the future can have a better life, a more just life. So it's a forward-looking justice when you ask, what is the harm and who was impacted and what are the needs and how do we repair that harm to move into a better future? I forgot what we were talking about originally, but you were asking, Paul, I'm sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought, but I was really wanting to give you information about the spiritual foundation of restorative justice. I kind of got off on that. I know that's not what you asked.
Oh, but thank you. That was really fun.
What did you ask?
Well, Jeff's got his hand up. Maybe we have another.
Okay. Sorry.
So anyway, I thought that was a really interesting set of comments. And I wonder, this week, the news seems to be sort of hot and heavy with with everything going on in Minnesota. How does the conversation, bring us your context to this, to like what this is doing in the conversation right now with both events happening in Minnesota right now?
Right. With both events, they're
sort of coming together, I suppose, in the conversation.
With the George Floyd trial and then the murder of Duante, right? Yeah.
It's a little difficult to separate them this week.
Yeah, it is interesting how they've just been paired for the world to see in a very dramatic way. Well, to me, this is evidence of how if we, as a nation, do not recognize, take responsibility for, take reparative action, take action to ensure non-recurrence, if we don't do that as a nation, to heal our birth traumas, then those traumas will perpetually reenact themselves. And that's what I see when I see what's going on in this week in Minnesota and seeing this young man, Wante Wright, killed because he had an air freshener hanging from his rear view mirror. That's why he was stopped. And then the cop said, "Oh, I thought I pulled the taser. It was a gun." And we've heard that story before. The same thing happened when Oscar Grant was killed here in California. Cop said, "Oh, I thought I was pulling my taser. I pulled my gun." No, So what I'm saying is this. Ours is a nation born in the twin traumas of genocide, land theft, colonization on the one hand, and slavery, the slave trade, white supremacy on the other. And even though we legally abolished slavery, I mean, we all know about, the 13th Amendment and the exception, right, for persons who have been convicted of a crime. But even in a larger sense, even though we legally abolished slavery, the racial terror at the essence of slavery, the white supremacy at the very essence of slavery, continued to live on in convict leasing, which was another form of slavery. There's a famous book, I can't remember the author, on convict leasing, Slavery by Another Name. After we abolished convict leasing, that very same racial terror and white supremacy that was at the essence of both slavery and convict leasing lived on in the chain gang, lived on in debt slavery, lived on in sharecropping. And then when we outlawed debt slavery and chain gang, that very same racial terror and white supremacy lived on in lynching, especially right around the turn of the century, and in Jim Crow. And when we abolished Jim Crow, that very same racial terror and white supremacy lived on in police killing. And it keeps on going. Lives on in mass incarceration, racialized mass incarceration, lives on in the school to prison pipeline, lives on in the white nationalism that's running amok today, lives on in white privilege and implicit bias.
So can I ask you a follow-up question to where you're going with this? And that is, when you discuss restorative justice with people who are skeptical about the presence of white supremacy, what are the most helpful ways to approach that? Because I feel like this is something I deal with all the time. I'll bring up anything with some, conservative members of my family or my faith community. Yeah. And the answer is just a flat denial of the existence of white supremacy. And it's difficult to talk about restorative anything if there's no problem to them. And how does one helpfully approach that?
Now that's it's a challenging question. And all I have been able to say when I hear this question, and it comes up a lot, is that the burden is on white people to do this work. And for too long, I think white people have depended on Black people to do the work, or they, it's not. We have been in collective denial about our collective biography for 400 years. We have hidden these truths and preferred to see ourselves as a democratic nation that is a beacon for the world, preferred to see ourselves as a land born in liberty. And this is a myth of American innocence. This is the narrative that has been supported in all of our textbooks and all of our literature and films and popular culture. This is what has been inculcated into us, that we are that kind of a wonderful nation. And of course, that has sunk in, that has, we have been steeped in that. Our collective consciousness is completely saturated in these notions of white supremacy. And and very often when I talk to white people, and I like to tell this story of some young people at Harvard Divinity School, where I did a workshop on restorative justice and racism and spirituality. When we got to the racism part of the workshop, I thought I'd just do a little survey. I said, how many of you in this classroom were racist? And over half of a little more than half were white, and the rest were people of color. And all of the white people raised their hands. And I was very impressed because they understood that to say and admit that they are racist is not to admit that they are bad people. It's not to admit that something's wrong with them, and it's not to say that they should be guilty. It's just to acknowledge a fact. This is the fact of who we are as a nation and who you are as white people. You know, you have drunk this Kool-Aid, this is the water you drink, this is the air you breathe, and you are a product of this culture that is through and through white supremacist. And so that's one thing. And the other thing I like to say is that the good thing about these times is that we're seeing an awakening amongst white people. Like never before. Yeah, we still have that 75 million who voted for the 45th president. True. And we had demonstrations now against police terror that are majority white. That the first time that happened was after George Floyd in June of 2020. And before George Floyd, for all of the other killings that occurred and all of the other, hundreds of demonstrations, they were majority Black. But now after George Floyd, majority white, and even 60% of white people came to believe that Black Lives Matter in surveys this past summer after the killing of George Floyd. So those are just some signs of an awakening that I am seeing. And also additional signs are, there's so many. Let's talk about all of the literature, the sort of blossoming of literature, anti-Black racism literature directed to white people, written by white people, for white people, like Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility, and her other books, and like Debbie Irving's, what is her book? Oh, Waking Up White. And like Ibram X. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. And so there's just this burgeoning field of critical whiteness that's turning out all of this literature. Then there are organizations that just overnight, it seems, spiked in membership into the hundreds of thousands of affinity organizations of just white people that are dedicated to becoming to fighting to fighting Black racism, and dedicated to helping the white people and its membership to become anti-Black racist leaders. And do you know Surge, Showing Up for Racial Justice? That's one of those organizations. And right after President Trump was elected in November 2016, they just really mushroomed. They grew so rapidly. And then even after George Floyd, Surge, I was told by one of the leaders that there were 500,000 white people wanting to join Surge in 500 cities across the nation. And there are other white organizations, White Awake, the music that we heard from June Lila Johnson. She's linked with White Awake because she's of European ancestry, as well as Diné and Cheyenne, and that organization is doing similar work. And the beauty of their work is their understanding that they are required not only to fight racism in the streets, but in those systems outside of them, but to fight racism in those systems that also live inside of them. So they do a lot of internal, you could say, healing work and spiritual work to look at themselves in the mirror and identify, recognize the ways that they engage in implicit bias, the subtle ways in which they are carriers of this poison of white supremacy, and not only observe and notice, but transform and eradicate and root out. So they're engaged in this very intense internal work in these organizations. So I'm just saying that there's so many resources out there for you as you do this anti-racism work as a white person, like never before, like I've never seen before in history. I could talk about, other things which are signs of this awakening, and very briefly how universities are uncovering for the first time, in some cases after 200 years, that their university owes its existence to and its sustenance to slavery, slave trade, genocide, land theft. And for the first time ever, they are unearthing these truths and telling the world about them, and also figuring out ways that they can repair the damage. So this is a time of awakening. This is a time when white people are being called to step up to the plate. Will every white person do that? No. But every white person didn't do it in Birmingham, Alabama. They didn't come around, at least not in that generation. In the adult generation, it took a little bit of time, but the trend was, to accept legal equality of people of color under the law, and to accept desegregation. There were a lot of there's always going to be resistors. And sometimes, rather than just focusing all your energy on somebody who you want to come around, sometimes the best thing to do is just, be the best version of yourself as an anti-Black racism white person. Model it for those people around you. Live it, rather than trying to tell them the way that they should live or think. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned earlier something about how we've just absorbed all this anti-racism. All the racist and white supremacist teaching. I think you said the other day that even in your school books in elementary school, you had some of those same kinds of mistruths in your books as well.
Oh, absolutely. An all Black school system that I came up in, all Black schools, all Black teachers. However, the school board was all white, kind of like the school board right there in Lowell, right? That was the difference. Yes. So in our books, which were not written by Black people, we learned that slavery was a good thing, and that Black people liked slavery because they were through it. They were, brought from those jungles and from that barbarism and that prehistory of their motherland, and delivered to these shores of freedom. And so Black people loved slavery, and they were happy in slavery. That was the myth. And all of us, I think I already said this, that all of our textbooks and our films and other popular culture novels tend to support this whole notion that we are, the greatest thing since mama's milk as a nation, and that we are a land of liberty. And if Black people were taken into slavery, it was really for their own good. And they'll tell you so. Now that's kind of extreme, of course, but the principle that the essence of what I'm saying is that the master narrative of popular culture and of our textbooks is based on a lie. It's based on this myth of American innocence, and so that means that part of this whole question of repair must include changing our curricula and telling the truth in our movies and plays, about our origins as a nation. You know.
Susan?
Yes, Susan.
Do you know what efforts might be underway to correct textbooks, especially for our younger children?
There are some efforts underway and scattered, you know, and I think that HR 40, that reparations bill that's pending now in the Congress, would likely address this so that it's not just scattered here and there efforts to transform our curricula to tell the truth about our origins, and not just our origins, but the legacies of those origins. I think HR 40 will probably result in some recommendation that we make that national law, like Germany has done. Germany now teaches the Holocaust. I mean, they are serious about making sure that all of the children know. Yeah, and so they teach the Holocaust not just in history or humanities or social studies. They teach it in math classes. They teach it in art classes. They teach it in all the STEM classes. In every single class, you learn the Holocaust. And teachers are required by law every year to engage in X number of hours of continuing education so that they can more effectively teach the Holocaust. And very closely sort of linked to these curricula are museums and memorials that dot the entire landscape of Germany. And the law requires children to spend X number of hours taking field trips to go to those museums and learn more. So they're very robust and vigorous in their curricular efforts. And I mean, imagine if we had curricula like that in this country. I don't think I mentioned that a study from USA Today, or US World Reports, I can't remember which one, but a mainstream publication reported a couple of years ago that only 8% of students, high school graduates in this country, knew that slavery had anything to do with the Civil War. Only 8% knew that slavery had anything to do with this. Isn't that amazing? But that's...
I was in a conversation a few months ago with somebody who really thought that people of color slaves were paid, and they were here because they wanted to come.
Yeah.
It was jaw-dropping to me.
Wow. Yeah.
And this wasn't a stupid person, obviously not very educated around.
And too many of us are like that, perhaps not to that extreme, but it's shocking in a way, but it's not so shocking in another way, you know. But it's something that, you know, needs to be changed as part of that reckoning, that racial reckoning that is upon us now. If we are to stop those cycles that I talked about earlier of racial terror, that's the kind of thing we need to do, is tell the truth about our history, and not just, you know, in one document that's proclaimed, you know, and distributed to the world, but in a very thoroughgoing way, you know, our textbooks, our children's nursery rhymes, our, you know, film, our plays, our poems, you know, because white supremacy is so totalizing and so all-pervasive, we need a remedy that is proportional. Yeah, so there was something else I was going to say about, a great resource. I mean, you're people of the cloth, you're clergy, but for teachers, a really good resource for these transformed curricula is an organization called Rethinking Education. They're located in Washington, in the state of Washington here on the West Coast. And they are churning out wonderful books and curricula guides and films. That for me, they would be a model of the kind of thing that needs to happen on a national level. Mm.
So we've sort of reached we have reached the official hour ending, but I wanted to make sure that if we have some other things you really want to say to Dr. Davis, that you have a chance to do that. I want to also just acknowledge that, and I said this to her in an email, but Dr. Davis, that you have gone through so much. You've experienced so many things that I hope never to have to experience. Mm-hmm. And yet here you are doing this really important work and calling us to compassion. You found that you needed to find some places to get healing, so you could turn that rage into something else. But I'd like to just have you could say a little bit more about that. You've sort of addressed it a little bit, but how did you get from all those experiences? I mean, you talked about your mother, you talked about that, but how, and still take care of yourself in all this?
Yeah.
I add to that because Charles Blow had a terrific piece today in the New York Times. Rage is the only language I have left. And so I've been wondering how we can embrace people who are feeling that way for good reason. And so therefore I would love to hear your answer, because his op-ed is
right. Thank you for calling my attention to that. I'll definitely take a look. I think the best response to that would be to really develop your capacity as a white person to be a fearless and intrepid anti-racist white person. I think and when that happens on a larger scale, it's already happening in many ways. Like, I told you about the incredible mushrooming of these anti-Black racism affinity white organizations. But for that to become a trend, for that to start trending amongst white people, I think would really help Charles Blow a lot, Yeah. And in many ways, I say that history is calling upon white people to step up in ways like never before. And as I also said, there's so much support out there for you to do just that, so many resources that you can tap. And it's important not to rely on, not to expect people of color to educate you and to get you where you need to be. There's a tendency to do that, right? People of color respond very badly to that. It's as if, we've been doing your uncompensated labor, your work for too long. It's got to stop now. You got to step up to the plate. Yeah. Not that you're a bad person, not that you should feel guilty about anything, but be brave, be courageous, have heart, and look right into the eyes of, this beast, that lives within us and that lives in all of the systems of domination outside of us and have, since the beginning of time in this country. And then what you were saying, Reverend Imogene, I was feeling just like Charles Blow, after 30 years, going through all that I went through. And then I mentioned that I got sick. And in many cultures, getting sick is an initiatory illness. It's a call from the ancestors. It's a call from spirit. And if you don't answer that call, if you just ignore it, then, your illness will never be healed. And that is a kind of illness that is healed when you do answer the call. And so I believe I did, or I've done my best to answer that call and have been engaged in a sort of transformation of who I am and the way that I am present to the world. And in some, I call it being a warrior and a healer, I will never lose my passion for and fierceness around eradicating injustice. I will never stop speaking my truth about injustice. Speaking my truth, however, not in ways that are deprecatory, not in ways that will diminish the humanity of another human being, not in ways that will diminish their sense of self-worth, no. But speaking my truth nonetheless, and not censoring myself. So I continue to do that as a warrior. And I do my best to be kind and be compassionate, and in many ways starting with myself to others. And for me, rage doesn't help us because it only increases the collective energies of rage and violence and hatred. And one of my own internal principles is that I want to live my life in a way that will increase not the anger and not the violence, not the hatred, but live my life in ways that will increase the collective energies of compassion, of kindness, of respect for other human beings, of the sense of being in deep relationality, and really try to model the values that will bring us into a new future, and being very robust and rigorous about that. So that means I have a spiritual practice. I have an African ancestral practice. I also meditate every day. I do yoga. I do qigong, and really those are helping me to develop a greater awareness of the energies inside of me, the thoughts inside of me, the feelings, which, am I thinking about someone in a way that is very harmful? Am I hurting myself? Am I not being sensitive to my own body? My body is telling me, Fania, you've been working too long. It's 11 o'clock, it's 12 o'clock. Don't just keep powering through, don't force, don't coerce, learn how to instead, listen, and not just, ignore and run roughshod over my needs or anyone else's needs very much. So it's that level of sensitivity and my own awareness that I find can be very helpful as we transform not only systems of domination outside of us, but systems that also live within us. And eating good food and having time with my family and doing things that bring me joy and that bring other people's joy, so we can increase those kinds of energies.
And thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And thanks to everybody who came. This has been recorded.